So yeah, Final Destination very much stays on brand for trying to keep you scared of smallest and most random of things. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Justice, and today we're going to be covering Final Destination Bloodlines at long last. This review is coming out a little bit later than I planned on, but I wanted to get a whole bunch of cast interviews clipped in here, and I also wanted to delve into some behind the scenes facts that I was reading about. So this is also going to be like a little bit of a deep dive. I'm also going to have a non-spoiler section of this video before I eventually go into all the spoilers, and I will give you fair warning before I do any of that. But right off the cuff, if you guys haven't seen this movie and you have somehow like missed the marketing for this film, go watch it. Like, that is my number one recommendation, and it's gonna spoil, I guess, my thoughts on this film. If you enjoy the Final Destination films, you're going to enjoy this one. It is a very, very solid entry into the franchise, so go watch it. Biggest recommend. Now, it's been over 14 years since we've had a Final Destination movie. Within that 14-year time span, there's been a lot of rumors that were made about this film. Even after the release of Final Destination 5 in 2011, Tony Todd, in an interview, discussed how if that movie did well financially, that supposedly they were going to film 2 back-to-back sequels that were supposed to come out, but that never came to fruition. I'm not exactly sure why. And then, as well, a few years earlier, producer Craig Perry, who has been the producer on the franchise since the very first installment, he came out in around 2019 and said they had plans for a new film as well, and that it was going to follow first responders coming into the scene of an accident, and that's how the premonition was supposed to take place. Obviously, that's not what this film ended up being, and that idea ended up getting scrapped. I do think that's a really cool idea still, though, and I do hope that they use that in a future sequel. But as for now, I am very happy with what they ended up doing, and it did change up the formula a little bit while still remaining the same as the other films. Another thing, too, that I want to say is if you saw my Final Destination 4 video, I kind of talked smack a little bit on Craig Perry and how he marketed that film. If I came across too harsh towards him, I want to take that back, like very, very much so, because I was watching other interviews that he did for this movie and him talking about other films in the franchise, and I do genuinely think that he has a love for these films. And two, he did this like 45-minute interview where he broke down and discussed every single death you see throughout the franchise. And this guy remembered the name of like the stunt people that played different characters. He knew exactly all of the special effects and details that went into like all these kills. He remembered all of the actors' names. Like, I just think that's very commendable on a producer's part. A producer could easily just sign their name off and let everyone else just have at it and not know anything and not give a damn about the franchise. He very much seems like he has all hands on deck in these films, and I find that to be very respectable, and I think that Final Destination 4 was just a misfire for everyone involved with that film, so I won't hold that against him, and I don't think anyone else should. In fact, I think this franchise is better having him involved in it after seeing all these interviews. Obviously, those ideas never came to fruition, but they did decide that they still wanted to create a new Final Destination film, so they started looking for directors. They eventually signed on Zap Lebowski and Adam Stein to direct this film, and the way they were able to get the job is like one of the coolest stories. I really wish that it would have been caught on video, but I'm just going to show a clip of what they had to say on how they got the job because I think it's kind of funny and it's super badass and just shows they had the chops to make this film in the first place.
Very elaborate Zoom interview and kind of like Zoom pitch. So could you talk a little bit about that?
We built this very elaborate kind of sequence of events into our pitch so that while we're pitching live, the room behind us would start to light on fire and all the executives start pointing and thinking that it's real, and we get up and we start putting the fire out and screaming and calling 911 and turning on this giant ceiling fan, and then they thought, and then we put it out and they're like, oh, that was very funny. They realized it was a gag, and then suddenly the ceiling fan starts sparking and comes falling down and chops Adam's head off.
I got better.
And so that was a way of just giving them a taste of what it was gonna be like to watch the movie, and they loved it.
Not only that, another thing that I kind of want to get into for like random stuff about this film before we end up talking about it is the marketing for this movie was so insane and so fun. I love a good viral marketing campaign, especially when they are done right. And I think this one did a very good job of advertising the movie. You had billboards that had like fake dead bodies hanging off of them as if a Final Destination accident just happened. You had logging trucks with the logo coming down the street. Even the 40X commercial that they had was super fun, to the point where they made a Fortnite map apparently for this film, which, hey, get it out there wherever you can, and a lot of people like Fortnite. The only thing I can say that I'm disappointed about with all this stuff is I live in bumfuck Montana, so I wasn't able to see any of these things in the streets, or even the Final Destination experience that they had. I think you were only able to do it in California. It was like this pop-up thing, and they would have these different endurance tasks that you could do to see how likely you were to survive death if death was coming for you. I really wish we got stuff like that here in Montana, but we are the farthest thing from ever getting anything like that, unless it's Yellowstone, apparently, unfortunately. Now we're just going to jump into the review. That's all the fun facts that I wanted to throw out there. This section of the review is going to be the non-spoiler section, and it's just going to be stuff that you see in the trailer. I'm not going to spoil any of the deaths or anything here, or the endings, so you don't have to worry about that, and I will give you guys warning before I do, so don't worry about that. Right off the cuff, though, I have to say this film beat the horror sequel Bloodline curse, because you have so many horror sequels with the title Bloodline in them, and either you have the painfully mediocre ones that could have done so much better, or you just have the ones that are just downright bad. There's never an in-between until now, and I have to commend them for that, because the moment that they said it was called Bloodlines, I have to admit that I did raise an eyebrow just a little bit. This film doesn't necessarily do a whole lot new with the franchise. What it does do, it shows you that they have the formula down to a T in this film, and it is very darkly comedic in many moments, and that's something that I thought that they were able to juggle really well back in Final Destination 3, but since then they haven't leaned into it so hard. If you saw my review on Final Destination 5, that was something I talked about with that film, where I felt like they could have leaned into it more, and then Final Destination 4, I felt like they tried leaning into it way too hard. This film juggles that balancing act perfectly well, and it's so much fun. It very much is not mean-spirited by any means, and you enjoy the characters. That's something that I think is a struggle with a lot of these movies, is they are just there as walking body bags. In some, it's more egregious than other films in the franchise, but more often than not, a lot of the characters don't feel that connected, and that's the whole point of this even being called Bloodlines, and like makes it make sense why all these characters feel more like regular people. All the characters, unlike in other sequels where it's just a group of friends or high schoolers or random strangers that survive an event, this is an actual family that is trying to escape death's list, and it adds way more to character development. And this is the longest movie in the franchise, but you don't feel that runtime, because even the in-between scenes between the deaths, I think they do a really good job of building these dynamics. And that was something I saw in a cast interview as well, where they were discussing how normally they don't have a time to rehearse the film. They just go in and they shoot, and they don't really get to know each other. These actors actually got a chance to rehearse the script and get to know one another and build that chemistry, which I think you can very much see on screen, and I think was needed, especially for having characters like that. I think that was done expertly well. With all that rambling out of the way, though, a brief plot synopsis for this non-spoiler section would be that the premonition takes place in the early 60s at the Skyview restaurant, which is essentially a stand-in for the Space Needle. And the grandmother has this premonition there, saves a whole bunch of people, and all these years later, death is coming after this family that wasn't even supposed to exist because she wasn't supposed to survive all the way back then. I think was a really good choice for the premonition was changing it up to that 60s setting. As well too, the Skyview restaurant is essentially a stand-in for the Space Needle, and obviously they weren't able to use the actual Space Needle in this film, so they had to do a Great Value brand version of it. But I think that was a really good choice as well. A couple years ago, actually, my boyfriend and I visited the Space Needle, and heights make me a little nervous. And while we were up there and we were walking on the glass floor, like those thoughts went through my mind of, oh no, is this floor gonna crack? Those anxieties are built to really good effect throughout that whole scene, and I think they do a really good job with that. And though I wouldn't say that this is the all-time greatest premonition in the entire franchise, I very much would say that this premonition is probably in my top 3 for the greatest premonitions that you see in these films. That's something else about this movie too, and it might just be recency bias for me, but currently this film is in my top 3 for the entire franchise as well. Like I said, for recency bias, it could be because this is my very first Final Destination film that I have seen in theaters as well. And I've talked about this in all my other reviews where Tony Todd has been in the films. He is very much a bias for me. The fact that this is his very last film that he ever created, it very much felt very sentimental to me. They did a very good job sending his character off, and I do really feel like the way that his storyline was written was very much a love letter to Tony Todd and his impact on the horror genre. And honestly too, I wish I would have had a more reactive theater experience and that the audience was more into it, because I've read different articles and like saw other reviews where people were saying that the audience clapped when he came on screen. My audience was so silent the whole movie, which I find to be so disappointing. I really would have enjoyed having a reaction like that. That scene, the way it was tailored and written, it did make me shed a tear. I very much am not afraid to admit that, and it did have me very choked up. They did a really good job, and I think that for that being his last role, I don't think you could have asked for anything better for him to have done.
People love the franchise. This is one of the few films that I've been able to return to more than once. The more you do a character, the more you understand it. And I love Bloodworth. He has a very interesting, enigmatic personality.
Another thing that's done really well in this film as well, and you need to have done well in a Final Destination movie, is the kills are really good. In fact, there is one specific kill, and I know a lot of other people are on the exact same page as me, that very easily is probably in my top Final Destination kills of all time. And if you've seen the movie and you've seen other reviews, you know exactly what kill I am talking about. The only nitpick that I would say I have with the kills, some of them you can see the CGI in them. That is something that I have very much grown accustomed to throughout these later entries in the franchise, and it's nowhere near as egregious in parts as like Final Destination 4 or even parts of the previous installment. I think the CGI is used to way better effect. Yes, it looks a little wonky at times, but it doesn't pull you out of the movie by any means. Another little nitpick that I have for the negatives on this film is I don't think the ending is the strongest. I'm not going to get into any spoilers of what that is. The ending is very abrupt, so don't set your expectations too high for a phenomenally ended film. But at the same rate too, I don't think a lot of the entries in this franchise has the strongest endings either. And lastly, for my nitpicks, is the trailers that they dropped for this film. I think if they would have left the one trailer of Eric in the tattoo parlor, that would have been perfect. But all these other trailers that they have dropped, I feel like spoil a lot of the film, and I wish I hadn't have seen them, but I have no self-control, and if I see a trailer pop up for a film I'm excited for, I can't help but click it, even though so often, especially for these franchise movies, it does end up ruining a whole bunch of stuff. So I am my own worst enemy when it comes to that. Like I keep saying, if you were able to avoid all these trailers and you have yet to see the film and you want to see it, keep avoiding them and just go see the movie. That's my biggest recommend, and go see it in theaters. This movie is very much gearing up to possibly be the highest grossing Final Destination film, especially with its opening box office weekend being the highest in the entire franchise. I think it's very exciting, especially for this being Tony Todd's last film. Go see him and this movie on the big screen. I really don't think you'll regret it if you enjoy these films. And two, if you're new to the franchise and you haven't seen these movies yet, you don't need to have seen the other ones to watch this installment. I think this is perfectly accessible. All these movies are very much an anthology. I think that you don't have to have seen other entries to get this one, but on the same note too, if you have seen other entries, there are plenty of callbacks where you're a longtime fan that you're going to enjoy, and the way that they're done, I think, are written into the plot very, very well. That's about all I have to say in the non-spoiler section. So this is your warning. If you don't want to hear any spoilers, then get the fuck out of this video right now. Anyways, on to the spoilers. So right off the bat for spoilers, and this is me jumping ahead a little bit, can we all agree that the fact that they had the balls to kill that little asshat kid right at the beginning of the movie was such a bold move? Any horror film that has the balls to kill a kid, like, mad respect. 100%, you got me. Speaking of said asshat kid, we'll jump into this premonition scene. Now, this whole premonition at the Skyview restaurant is essentially started by literally just a single penny. And a single penny is literally what ends up causing so much of the havoc in this film, all the way up to the final sequence in the movie. In this Space Needle sequence, though, you're following Iris, the grandmother, who is currently expecting. She's pregnant and she hasn't told her husband yet, and it kind of built into like the familia drama, like right off the bat, where you have her getting taken on a date by her boyfriend to this restaurant that just opened up. And it's a very cute scene, and they're very believable as a couple. And the actress that plays Iris as well, I think she's a lot of fun and does a really good job with the role. Like I said earlier, having this all set in the 60s setting is so much fun. You've never seen this in any other Final Destination film. It feels very fresh to the franchise, and I think it'll make it way easier when you're rewatching the franchise to get to this film and again feel that breath of fresh air when you return to it. Even the soundtrack throughout this scene and throughout the whole movie is a lot of fun too. You have these jazz singers singing Shout, and they do a really good job with that. And the way that it pairs with the disaster that happened in the restaurant, I think, is a lot of fun as well, because you have like all these people dancing on this glass floor, and as they're dancing, the floor is cracking, and all this suspense is building up as you hear the song rip to the part where it's like, a little bit softer now, a little bit softer now. And like, as that's pairing up, it like perfectly fills the tension because it just keeps going, and you see all these spider cracks going across the floor, and it's just so much fun. When the floor finally decides to crash through, it is a very welcome payoff. During this premonition too, there's so many of those iconic random deaths that you get in a Final Destination movie. You have this old woman that catches on fire and she's running through the restaurant, which I need to shout this out now. Currently, that has the Guinness World Record for oldest person to be lit on fire in a film. This stunt actress even came out of retirement in an article that I read to be in this film. So mad kudos to her. I think that's really cool. You have a death like that, and then you even have this other scene where you have the entire restaurant start to crumble apart. It starts to tip, and you have this woman that falls forward and lands on the glass window facing the ground. And as she's there, this piano comes falling down and hitting her through the window. And the little asshat kid that I mentioned, who starts this whole premonition with the goddamn penny, is running out of the restaurant, and it looks like he made it. But just as he makes it outside, this whole ass piano lands on him, and that had me busting up so hard. I think that was such a perfect payoff because that kid was such a little demon spawn. And too, during this premonition, you have this singer who has her son with her, and she ends up talking to Iris, and she asks her how long she's expecting as her little son is standing off in the background. And the singer ends up dying in a death that I would say is very much a reference or paying homage to Alex's burning death in the original Final Destination, because you see the flames go at her and sear her skin off in this shot in a very similar type of fashion. As this vision goes on, Iris sees that the kid is still alive and she tries to save him, but before she can, she ends up falling. And to spoil it now, because we're in the spoiler section, the little kid is Tony Todd's Bloodworth character. This film delves into that backstory, and as I go on in this video, I will talk more about that because I think it was really cool how they handled it, and it showed just enough to explain his backstory without delving too much into it to make it feel cheap, and that's something that was done very well. You have this scene though when she tries to save him that the entire restaurant starts crumbling down and then they're hanging off the side of the building, but she's wearing a wedding band and the wedding band like perfectly lodges between two nails as she's hanging in the air with the kid. Because of all the weight, obviously, it ends up splicing all the skin off her finger and they fall to their death. And all that finger thing, like this whole franchise knows how to do little like body horror moments like that like always make my skin crawl. And more often than not, those little things are what make my skin crawl more than the actual deaths that happen themselves. Unlike in other films in the franchise though, and I thought this was a really cool jump cut, is when she ends up dying, instead of her waking up from the premonition and seeing everything happening, you have Stephanie, our main character, waking up from the premonition and freaking out as if it were a nightmare. And I thought that was a really cool jump cut to have it happen like that. And this is what's going to lead into all of our familial ties throughout the film that I think are very, very well done. But you have Stephanie, who's off at college. She's kind of become disconnected from her brother and her father in the film. She's failing out of college because she's been plagued with the same reoccurring nightmare over and over again of her grandmother at this restaurant and not knowing that this stuff actually happened. When she goes home to find more answers about this really demented dream that she keeps having, you see all these very strained family ties that very much make the characters in this film feel way more real and well-rounded, more so than you have in any of the other Final Destination films. You have her brother who she's grown distant from, and he feels like she just kind of dipped on him, and their relationship throughout this film as they grow closer again and form a bond with one another because of this ungodly situation they have been put in, I think was very well done. I love the sibling aspect of this movie. You even have their cousins and their uncle that I also think are really fun additions. They seem like a very sweet family and less messy than our lead character Stephanie's side of the family. And I would say that the uncle's family is the one that provides a lot of the comedic relief throughout this film. There are plenty of people that aren't included on the list because they're not technically in the bloodline. Like her father isn't Iris's son, that's her son-in-law, so he's not on the list. And her aunt as well isn't on the list for the exact same reasons. You as well have a twist with our character Eric, who is very much one of the funniest characters in this film, where they think he's next, but he ends up not being next because they find out that his mother had an affair, so he's actually nowhere on death's design. He's the only one of the cousins that's actually safe in the film, and it is so hilarious when he finds out that he's not his father's kid, and he finds out that he's this other dude in town's kid, and the line that he ends up dropping, something along the lines of, "And that's why he always wanted to play catch with me, now it all makes sense," type thing. And I was watching an interview where he was talking about how he ad-libbed that, and I thought that was super funny, and I very much enjoyed all of his little quips throughout the movie. You discover, though, a lot of the family's strain here is from Iris and her fear of death, because a lot of people don't believe her. And you also learn that the reason it took so long for death to actually get to them is because when Iris had the vision, she saved hundreds of people's lives from that restaurant that were supposed to die, so it took death longer to play catch up to them, so all these people that survived were able to go on and have families that weren't supposed to exist as well, that ended up also getting killed off before eventually it led to them being the last ones and Bloodworth. And that's something else that comes out in this film, is Iris is essentially living in solitude in the middle of nowhere, protecting herself from death. She even has this book that I wish we would have gotten more of that explains all these different details of how to avoid death, and like all of her ramblings she was able to do locked up in this cabin by herself to figure out exactly how to tell what death was going to do. I wish we would have seen more of that and that it would have been less of a one-note thing, because what you see in the trailer for it is essentially all you get of it. Since we're on the subject of the grandmother, I really do wish we would have gotten more Iris, especially from the trailers. I thought we were going to. Ultimately, that's not what we got. I thought she was very much underutilized, and her little bits that she did have in the movie, I thought were really funny. Her essentially talking to Death as Death started to set up all these different things to kill her, and her stopping it, being like, nah, Death, you ain't getting me this time. I know you by now, bitch. I thought it was really fun seeing her character react like that. Ultimately, though, her death is what kicks everything off for the chain reaction of Death coming after the rest of the family, because Stephanie goes to visit her to get answers. And at first, Stephanie doesn't believe her, and the grandmother lets her know, like, you're going to believe me. And just as she says that, a chain reaction of events happen, and this pole ends up going straight through the grandmother's head right in front of Stephanie, blood splattered to the face. And just saying, if I wasn't a believer before and I was in Stephanie's shoes, I sure as hell would have been a believer after that, seeing a crazy ass death like that. And talking about the grandmother and this book, I'm going to just jump into my Tony Todd section and just get that out of the way now. As she's going over the book, she sees all these different messages within the book about how she has this friend, but she only sees his initials. And then when she ultimately ends up finding that friend, it ends up being Bloodworth. And the way that whole scene is handled and the way his character is handled throughout this entire film, I think is very well done, especially in respect to the grandmother's character. When you find out that the grandmother was locking herself away to not only protect her whole family, but to also protect the child that she had saved all the way back in the 60s and let him grow up. I think too, it added way more to his character that we hadn't seen previously in any other film. It makes way more sense to why he knows all this stuff about death. And something that I touched on in an earlier review is he's always felt like the ferryman for death to me, taking all these lost souls to death. He never came across as the evil guy. He just came across as very ominous to me. And now I think that they did a very good job of making it make sense why he knew all this stuff about death throughout all these different films in the franchise and was able to help our protagonists in the other movies, because he was on death's list as well and knew that eventually his time was going to come. That is something that I was nervous about when coming into this movie, was how they were going to handle that, because they were toting this as this was going to be more backstory for Bloodworth's character. I've said that through my other reviews as well, that I wanted that I thought that this franchise needed that, especially since he is really the only through character that we have in all these movies. I've wanted more than just having him spout exposition at our lead characters. I wanted to know more of who he was, and I'm really glad that Tony Todd was able to fulfill that and this be his last role. And I'm really glad that he was excited to do it too. And they tailored the character around him, and him essentially knowing that he wasn't going to be in any more movies. It is really hard to watch. And the moment that he even walks on screen, it is very gut-wrenching, because you see him essentially a shell of the man that he used to be because of his real life sickness. He's very skinny, and you can tell that he wasn't okay, but he still brings his all to the role. And I genuinely stand by my prediction that I made of this being a good send-off of his character. I think it was a good send-off to his character and to him and his touch on this entire genre as a whole. And we're just gonna not talk about it anymore though like that, because I feel like I'm just gonna start tearing up again like I did in the movie theater talking about it. So we're gonna move on from that. Very well done, his entire scene with that, like, ooh, shivers. Within his exposition, again, in this film, you have little callbacks that are really cool. He even, like, mentions how Kimberly is the only one that's actually beaten death, and I thought that was cool to hear that, because you haven't heard any mention of her since the second film. He also lets them know in this scene as well, stuff that's been touched on in other films in this franchise, that if you're able to flatline and then come back, that you can break Death's design and you'll be safe, or you can kill someone else and take their life and continue to live your own. This leads into the humor that I was talking about in this film. You have this scene of the two brothers in the hospital, and they walk past the room with all the babies in it, and they're looking through the glass, and they have this conversation of like, we could just kill a baby, right? No, we could, but we could. No, that wouldn't be like, but like, it'd be easy, right? No, we can't kill a baby. I was cracking up so hard with that little back and forth. Obviously, they don't end up doing it, but just the fact that they were grappling with that with each other, and to find out too that those two actors ad-libbed that scene as well, I think is really funny. And it very much, like I said, you can just see the chemistry and the charisma from a lot of these characters. But since I'm kind of going all over the place with this spoiler section anyways, I suppose that we should talk about the kills, because there are some really good kills in this film. I've already talked about the grandmother's death, so we're just going to move into the other ones. One of the cousins, and it's a really funny scene. It had me busting up. Again, there were so many scenes in this that just had me laughing in the theater, where you have Stephanie, who thinks Eric is next. She's fighting with him, trying to convince him to believe her, and as they're fighting, you see the sister start jogging, and it's really fuzzy and in the background, and all of a sudden this chain reaction of events happen as the two of them are bickering, and this soccer ball hits her in the head, and she falls into this trash can that gets picked up by a dumpster, and she gets tossed in the back, and that just had me like on the floor. And it just kept amping it up too, because again, with the badass soundtrack in this movie, they're trying to stop this fucking garbage truck, and the guy driving it doesn't even notice them because he's wearing his earbuds, listening to Kelly Clarkson's "What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger," and such a great song choice. But she ultimately ends up getting crushed in the garbage truck, which is a really fun death scene. And then you have their father who died with the lawnmower. You see that in the trailer, so I'm not really going to get into it, but that was a really well done scene as well. And it's one of the ones where I wish that I wouldn't have seen it in the trailer and that it wouldn't have been spoiled for me before going into the movie. That's part of the reason that I've been saying, like, if you haven't seen the trailer, avoid it. And to talk about, like, the best death scene in this entire film is the MRI scene. It is a very fun one. You have Eric and his brother trying to figure out how to get his brother off of death's list, and when they decide that they're not able to kill somebody, they realize that the only thing that they can do is kill his brother. It's a very endearing scene. Even though Eric's trying to kill his brother, you can tell he's doing it because he really has no other choice. The only way to save him is to kill him and try to bring him back. And they like go to this vending machine and get a pack of Reese's because his brother's allergic, and he decides that he's going to have him eat that, and they're going to let him go anaphylactic and let him die before eventually bringing him back. And as it's all going on, you already essentially know that it's not going to go right. You don't know how it's not going to go right, but it's not going to go right. It's a Final Destination movie, and they're not the main character, so obviously. They end up going into a side room at the hospital with the Reese's, and the brother starts to go anaphylactic, but as this is going on, a chain reaction events start happening, and the MRI ends up going off, and as it's turning on, you have this magnetic pole created by it that ends up making anything that's metal start pulling into it, and it leads to one of the most gruesome scenes. And it also ties into something Tony Todd said earlier, where if you try to mess with Death's plan, that sometimes things will get messy, and this is the exact messy he was talking about, because this scene is a very fun death, but also a very poachy death, because Eric is very alternative. He has all these piercings, and as he's standing there, you see his nose ring go up and then pull out of his nose, and then you see it with his earrings, and then it goes down to his nipples, and then all of a sudden you see a bulge start to form from his pants where his Prince Albert is. But before you can see that, because thank God you don't see that, you see him get pulled into the MRI and crushed through it. And you have his brother, who is in anaphylactic shock, trying to get to his EpiPen, and just as he's able to get to his EpiPen and save himself after his brother dies, the nurse opens the door, and the magnetism is going off for the MRI still, and one of the springs from the vending machine where he got the Reese's ends up popping out and getting him right in the head, and it is such a fun scene. All these deaths lead to our final act, though, where you have our main family going to the cabin where the grandmother was staying. You have Stephanie and Charlie and their mother, who is very estranged from them, but she decides to make the very heroic decision that she's going to hold up in the cabin just like their grandmother did, so that her children can continue to live their lives. But once they get there, an explosion breaks out and the mother almost dies. But before she can, she ends up saving the brother who's trapped underneath this log. As all this is going on, though, the sister is inside this overturned RV that's filling with water and she's starting to drown. When the mother finally gets Charlie out from underneath this log, she tells him to go save his sister, that she'll stay alive as long as she can. And another scene that had me cracking up, immediately after she says that, this power line ends up coming down and crushes her right in front of him, where it's just like, oh, you weren't able to stay alive very long, were you? And I thought that was a really good misdirect that they did in the trailer. One of the few praises I will give to those trailers is in those, you see a completely different death for her, where she's going through this spinning door and she ends up getting crushed inside of it. And I was waiting for that to happen. Even when we got to the scene at the hospital where you see the spinning door, I was convinced that it's like, really another death that you guys spoiled for me. But thank you. I will say this, that like I'm really excited to see the deleted scene for that and see a death that we didn't get. But I think it's cool that they added that in to misdirect a little bit, and I wish that more of the trailer would have done that. In fact, more movies should do that. Add deleted scene stuff in the trailer so we really don't know what to expect. I don't know if anybody else likes that idea. Let me know in the comments. Like, would you be cool with that? Because I wouldn't mind that. I feel like it would keep you on your toes, especially if they decide to release the deleted scenes. I don't see the problem with doing stuff like that at all. The brother ends up getting into the RV and the sister ends up drowning. He pulls her from the RV and gives her CPR and brings her back to life. And they realize, like, we did it. Like, somebody was supposed to flatline, and if they flatline, that means that we're taken off the list and that we're saved. Like, we're completely fine. Case closed. So, just like in every other Final Destination movie, we jump cut to a little bit of time later, and the brother is getting ready to go to homecoming. As he's at his homecoming date's house, his sister is seeing him off, and they're talking about what happened, and they mention about her flatlining to his date's father. And the father makes a comment where he's just like, well, you didn't, like, actually flatline, you know that, right? And she's just sitting like, what are you talking about? He's just like, well, like, he would have flatlined, like, he wouldn't have been able to give you CPR. That's not how that works. Like, you were just unconscious, and like, it's lucky that he was there because you would have died, but like, you didn't actually die. And both Stephanie and Charlie get a look on their faces like, oh no, it's not over. And as this is all going on, the exact penny from the beginning of the film ends up falling out of this old woman's purse and rolling all the way down the street into a set of train tracks. And it ends up making it to where the train tracks can't switch. And this penny that opened the kills in this film also ends the kills in this film, because the train ends up derailing. Charlie and Stephanie end up looking over, and they start running down the street as this train is charging at them through the road, knocking up all this rubble. And just as they think that the train has stopped and that they're safe, and these logs start falling down and crush both Stephanie and Charlie, and then the film ends. Talking about it, I'm like, that is so much fun, but when I watched it, it felt very abrupt to me, and I think rewatching it, it might grow on me more, but as of right now, I wish that it would have been more than what we got. But it was cool in the end credits immediately after that, where you see the penny rolling around all these like red lines that like go to all these different events that have happened since the Skyview accident, showing all these obituaries in the papers before eventually getting to the final obituaries of Stephanie and Charlie's. And then it fades to black and you get this title card on the screen of in memory of Tony Todd. Another scene where I was just like, painful, man. I do think that scene could have been done a little bit better overall, though. And it might grow on me more with rewatches, like I just said, but it could have been reworked. And this movie would have been firing on all cylinders for me if it wasn't for that. Like, they were so close to the finish line, but they just, like, barely didn't make it. But it didn't take away from the enjoyment of this movie. It was still a really, really good time. And currently, too, this film is sitting at $51 million for its opening weekend, especially with all the good coverage that it's getting and the high reviews from critics and audiences alike. I see that number very much going up way more. In fact, I hope it grosses more, because I wouldn't mind seeing more sequels in the future, especially if they are to this caliber. And to speak about critic reviews too, this is currently the highest rated film in the entire franchise, and that doesn't upset me at all. I can totally see that. Though it isn't number one on my list by any means, it is still very far up there. So I am very much not mad at critics for that. I am perfectly okay with the fact that we had to wait 14 years for this, especially because if you're going to take that much time to release a film or to make a follow-up sequel in a franchise, then I would rather you take that time and make something good than just push out some schlock. Like, I'm very okay with the fact that they decided to wait before making this installment. Furthermore, too, with the way that they handled Bloodworth's character in this, I genuinely wouldn't mind if this was the final film in the franchise either. I'm completely welcome to more sequels, but also I do think that if this were the final entry, it would feel like a very good bookend for the franchise, which Final Destination 5, I know a lot of people feel that way about that movie. I have my problems with it. I don't think it's a bad film by any ways, but there's a lot of pacing issues, I think, with that film, and the characters are nowhere near as likable in that one as they are in this one. But the ending of that one was a really good bookend for the Flight 180 survivors that started our love for this franchise. And I think having this follow-up that's a bookend for Bloodworth's character, who was in that first film as well. Like, I think it's a really cool way to tie up the franchise. So, like I said, if they don't make more, then I'm okay with that. But I am open to more sequels. And if it does well in the box office, then without a doubt, we're probably going to get another sequel. Anyways, though, this is the first franchise that I finished all the way through. And I'm kind of stoked about that. But you guys should let me know what you thought of Final Destination Bloodlines if you've gone to see it yet, and what you liked or disliked about it. Let me know what your ranking for the franchise is as well down in the comments below. I would love to hear it. Too, if you guys want to see more videos just like this one, then click that subscribe button. I would love to have you on my channel. I cover anything and everything horror. If you guys got requests for future films that you want me to cover, then I'm all ears to that as well. I'm always looking for new things to watch and new content to be able to push out to you guys. And my next video is going to be for 28 days later, so keep an eye out for that. It should be out really soon because I already have it recorded. I just wanted to get this franchise done before I jump to that franchise. But anyways, with all those little updates and my thoughts about this movie all out of the way, this has been Justice, and I really hope that I see you guys on the next one. Take care.